One of the hardest projects I ever did was an Israeli-Palestinian version of Sesame Street. I mean, even just saying it in today's climate seems like an impossibility. The Israelis very much wanted to embrace and open themselves to the Palestinians. The Palestinians said, look, we've been in a forced marriage for years. We do not want to be embraced.
Your superpower can be in bringing people together. Were you able to bridge those divides? Please subscribe so more viewers like you can also listen. Hi, I'm Gilad Palley, and this is the Possible Podcast, where I have conversations with ethical leaders to provide tangible wisdom for a good life. It's an absolute pleasure to have Lewis Bernstein today. Thank you so much for joining.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Lewis is the former executive producer of Sesame Street and has dedicated himself to education and to uplifting others. He's also the founder of 3G Mentoring, a way to bring together people from many generations to provide wisdom across all levels. Thank you so much for being here. Really excited for the conversation.
Okay, let's get to it.
Amazing. Okay, so first question, what is your favorite Sesame Street character, and can we hear the accent?
So, a parent always says, I love all my children. I don't have any favorites, but there are some that somehow, there's only a few voices I could do. So I'm going to tell you, I loved the actor who did the Count, and I was very close to him, and I loved his voice, and I loved his energy. So I'll give you the Count von Count. Gilad, that's one time we've spoken. Let's talk some more. That'll be 2. Or then after that, 3, 4, 5. I'm done.
Amazing. I'm excited for number 6. So I guess going to the beginning, since you've impacted so many people in the way that you've produced something that has literally touched millions of people, who were the formative influences on your life that had an early impact on your journey?
Wow, that's such a hard question. I think in some ways, of course you have influence of your parents, but you don't really, really appreciate that. At least I didn't until much later. So I think in some ways I'm very aware. I'll give you a story, and then you can see where it comes from. I went to rabbis from the Bronx, and I took the IRT subway every day from 4th grade on, and I sometimes would meet my father, who was coming out of synagogue, and he'd had 2 newspapers, the New York Times and a Wall Street Journal, and he would give me the New York Times. He would teach me how to fold it up. I'd read the sports section. I'd get a seat, and he said, look sharp and see who is around you, because you could always hide in a paper, but that's not what you're supposed to do in life. You're supposed to look and check out the scene and see whom you can help. So one day I'm sitting there in the subway, and a woman stands in front of me in a tight red dress, red high heel shoes, and lots of makeup, but I was in a dilemma. I knew she was old, but she tried to look young. And I said, should I get up for this woman? Because if I do, I might be insulting her because she's trying to look young. But if I don't, I'll be giving into my evil inclination to hide. So I got up, and the train jerked, and her high heel fell on my instep, and I was in pain. And I said, did I do the wrong thing? I didn't think I did. I thought that was a model of something that my father taught me. And again, in many ways, I think part of that is to think a little bit about trying to fulfill a sense of who you are, whom you represent, being part of the world, and just somehow sharing with the world. And I think that was a deep lesson my father taught me, because he was a very kind, quiet person. But I was influenced by my mother, who was quiet until she was crossed and was very strong-willed. And I think part of those 2 opposites became part of my personality.
That's so interesting. And I've heard you describe how, like your superpower can be in bringing people together. I'd be curious if you think it relates to that at all, but if there's a story when you feel there was a time where people were really at odds and you were able to bridge those divides and help them come to kind of a tangible solution.
Well, first, let me deny the superpower. I don't think I had any, but if I have a positive attribute, I would say that I learned in camp that somehow there were so many more talented people than me, and that I had the ability sometimes to get them to work together. So one of the hardest projects I ever did, I think I told you about, was an Israeli-Palestinian version of Sesame Street. I mean, even just saying it in today's climate seems like an impossibility. Well, it was fairly impossible then. And bringing Israelis and Palestinians together uh, was not easy. But what was very interesting was that both cared about their children. Both were tentative. The Israelis very much wanted to embrace and open themselves to the Palestinians. Palestinians basically said, look, we've been in a forced marriage for years. We do not want to be embraced. But they said, you know what? You, as an American and representing Sesame Street, we can learn from each other through your mediation. It felt almost like a political introduction to them. And getting them to work together became something that was a real challenge. Part of it was to listen. Listening was so hard, but we wanted to have one street where they would live together, where they would show tolerance. The Palestinians said, we can't have one street. We don't live on one street, and we can't go far from the reality of our existence. So we said, okay, so we'll have two streets, a Palestinian street and an Israeli street. But Israelis and Palestinians have to be able to visit each other. And we started that. And then we had a curriculum meeting. And the curriculum talked about all the kinds of things they could learn about respect for each other, what they shared, what they didn't share. And one of the issues I had as an American Orthodox Jew leading the Sesame delegation was to say, what about religion? Would you both deal with your own religions in some ways so you could share with each other since you're part of the Abrahamic tradition? Why don't you share with each other? And Daoud Kutab, who was the executive producer of the Palestinian version, said, that's a great idea. The Israeli producer said, no, that's a terrible idea. We don't want to deal with religion on our show. And so part of the issue is to say, well, religion is a very broad topic. There's ritual, and then there's the way people treat each other. Let's start with that. And that was part of the way we started to really connect each side to each other. It was not smooth, but it was something that we were able to do for 2 seasons until after Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated. And then really the political situation got so harsh that we were unable to really work together and actually try to think about the potential for a very different Middle East vision for young children. So we had to stop.
I appreciate it. And that raises, I guess, a few questions. One, thinking about what are some of the small details that as a producer you thought a lot about, but maybe in the audience we don't notice so obviously, but they subtly influence us. What was really important in how you casted that and how you said it and how you directed it? What were some of the smaller things that happened behind the scenes?
Well, it all starts for me because I came from the world of education before I became a producer with what are the educational goals? What are they? What are the lessons you want a child to learn? What are the lessons both in terms of cognitive goals, learning letters, numbers, words, how to speak to somebody, but also what are the social emotional attitudes you want to be able to convey about difference, about understanding difference, about respecting them, not hiding them, being able to talk about them. Those were always part of the goals. And to deal with that, in so many ways, you have to go to some kind of stereotype. Somebody has to look the part. So you have in the Israeli show, you have to have somebody who looks like he is a Palestinian, not necessarily wearing a keffiyeh, but who speaks Arabic. And if you don't understand Arabic, you have to find a way that you can translate that. So you have to find all of the little details that a child will understand, that somehow you have to remember the goal is not for the producer or the writer to deal with his or her political issues on the screen. It is for a child to learn the goals of there's a better world that you can embrace if you understand and respect each other and learn from each other, learn a little bit of the other's language, learn a little bit of the other's culture. And that is part of what is hidden within any production. Any producer will think about what are the images on the screen that they want to convey with humor, but also with seriousness underneath it.
It's so interesting of how sometimes you have to lean into these stereotypes to break them down.
I'll tell you a funny story. John Stein, who was the brilliant guiding light of Sesame in its early years, at the very beginning, even probably before the women's movement, said, I want to do a segment about what women can be. And he used Muppets, and he put on all these wonderful ideas about a woman can be, a brain surgeon, a rocket scientist. And there was like this wonderful song. Then when we tested it, because I was part of research, the kids went to the first image, because the first image was, I used to be in the kitchen and I used to just bake cookies. And now I'm sewing up bodies because I'm a brain surgeon or whatever. When you asked the child what it was about, they went to the stereotypic image and they never got to the other image. So sometimes with the best of intents, you have to remember where the child is and how you have to bring that child along. And that's not a one-shot deal. It takes time. You need to build a cast. You need to build a season. And when you're lucky enough to have a Sesame Street program, which had 130 hours per year in its early days, it was really dramatic what you could actually accomplish.
Being so thoughtful in your professional space about the education of children, did that come into your home in different ways, do you think, in terms of the things that you were looking to pass on when you were modeling in the day-to-day? Did your kind of profession shape in any way what you wanted to bring home?
I'm sure it did. What I can think of to bring up to the conscious level was one of the things I really loved about Sesame Street, the old Sesame Street, which you will not see today, was that we tried to make it a window to the world. We had live action segments, which could introduce children to artists, to musicians, to different countries, to different populations, to the Midwest, to milking a cow, to a rocket launch, where lots of children, depending where they live, would never be exposed to these things. And I think part of that attitude became something that I would think about with young children, with my wife's children, and that was to give them an exposure to difference, to different forms of experience, and to respect that there are different forms of intelligence. And that's probably one of my first lessons that I took out when I came to Sesame Street. I was a researcher, came from the academic world, and all of a sudden I was exposed to people like Jim Henson and writers who were probably, if they were in my class in Ramaz, would have been in the back row throwing spitballs. They were the bad boys or the bad girls, but they had a different kind of intelligence. Their intelligence was ever the same as any of the academics that I had met, but it was in a different form. So I wanted to make sure that we encouraged our children to develop their own skills, their own set of intelligence. But I have to say most of the values of my parenting and my wife's parenting was really coming from our own Jewish background of what we had learned, what we were taught. And part of that is to try to really think about the holiness of a child and their spirit and not to break their spirit. It's very hard to do that when you're angry. And I could say I'm sure I lost my anger a lot. But part of that, I think, was a blending of both the professional world and my background.
Absolutely. Could you speak a little more about the role Judaism has played in your life and what it means to be an Orthodox Jew to you, and what does it mean to be a Jew to you?
It's a very interesting thing. I could talk to some of my friends who grew up with me and went to Jewish schools and Jewish camps, and some of them could say, I don't buy the chosen people concept. What do you mean chosen? Does that make us in some ways think that we are better? Not at all. I basically say we have a mission. And everybody's got a mission statement. What's my mission statement? My mission statement is to try to be a partner with the Creator. In some ways, to think about how could there possibly be evil in a world in which you believe there was a good God who created? And part of that understanding is that there was some kind of Kabbalistic constriction of God to make room for man to do what man can do. And if that's the case, and I believe that, and that means my mission is to try not to be James Bond when I was a kid growing up because I thought he was cool, but to be me and the me that somehow connects to that bigger mission of trying to do something that's good and trying to do it in a way that somehow will make the world a little bit better in little doses and little steps, whether it's opening the door for somebody, holding up, helping an older person with a shopping bag when I was younger, or to something bigger that works on Sesame Street, which I remember Joan Cooney saying, people who work in the international department of Sesame Street are like modern day missionaries. We're going around the world, we're teaching education, we're trying to provide skills. And I think that fit with the way I looked at my role. I didn't see one in contrast to another.
It's really beautiful. And one of the ideas that we've spoken a lot about is, on one hand, recognizing that we are dust, and on the other hand, recognizing that we have been created in the image of God. Is there a moment that comes to mind that you had to remind yourself where you were feeling too close to one and too far from the other, and you had to actively bring this idea back to the forefront to counterbalance whatever you were feeling in that moment?
That's also such a hard question. So, look, as you're growing up, you don't necessarily think about the dust part. You think about, how can I achieve the most? How can I be the coolest? How can I actually get a date? How could I, whatever. And then you're reading texts about Moses, who was the most humble of individuals. And it's like, how do you put all that together in some ways of trying to understand who you are and how you react? And I guess in so many ways, what is so hard is to look at leaders in the world who will remain nameless, who you think have a certain amount of arrogance. And you think about, well, but wait a second, the archetype of the best modeled in the Torah is Moses, and he was the humblest of people. And what's that mean to me? How do I then respond to that? And I don't think there was one moment that I thought about both of them, but I do think that at some point when you're given a role, becoming an executive producer of Sesame Street, if you are dust the whole time, you will never get anything done. So you have to say, I am a part of the creation of the Almighty, and therefore I have to lead with whatever skills I have been given. Don't be shy about them, but certainly don't be arrogant about them. And I think that is something I felt. And it's funny, since I think about television, I thought about this question a little bit. I remember seeing a terrible television program when I was a little kid, called The Eternal Light, which was about Jewish subjects. And I remember they were very boring. And there was one episode, however, that really struck me. Jack Gilford was a great actor, and he was playing the role of Levi Berdichev, a Hasidic rabbi, and he's walking with his wife. And in front of them is an old man who's a cripple, and he's walking very slowly. And his wife turns to him and says, Levi, you are being honored at a dinner. If we follow this man, we're going to be late. And he says, okay, I'll be late. And Beatrice, I don't want to hurt his feelings. And I'm just thinking, what does that mean? What does that mean? Is he crazy he's being honored? And yet he's being sensitive to an individual who is in front of him. I think those are kinds of little things that we think about in terms of how do we respond to something in our path. I'm late to get somewhere. Do I go through when there's a pedestrian crossing and I still make that turn, or do I wait? Those are issues we confront every moment of our lives. And that was a model that I thought was thinking about, is he dust or is he being honored at the time? So
Wow.
those are thoughts.
the world happens in those little moments. The accumulation of those moments is what a life is ultimately. And so it's a powerful reminder that even in the small moments we can take a step back and recognize what's important to us. And one thing you spoke to was kind of this change of maybe the mindset being different when you're younger versus when you're more seasoned in your career. And I think that relates to what you've created with 3G mentoring. And so I'd love to hear kind of what was the origin of that, and maybe if it's impacted you in a particular way, what that impact was.
Yeah, so the Sesame 3G mentoring grew out of a period of time during COVID when I was invited. I had finally graduated preschool after 43 years of working at Sesame Street, and I was invited.
Everything in good time.
To be blunt, time to get out. Where I was invited back to an alumni network meeting at the workshop, and they suggested, "Why don't you raise money, alumni, for the workshop?" And we said, "No, this isn't a university." But all of us felt that we almost could have done this work without being paid because we cared about the mission. I said, "Why don't we find a mission the workshop is not doing right now and see what we could do about at least getting something off the ground?" And I said, "Let's start with me personally. I am an older person. I wasn't that old 10 years ago or 5 years ago when we started this. But I said, soon in the year 2030, older adults are going to outnumber young adults like you, Gilad. They're going to be more people like me." And
That's a good thing, maybe.
today, I don't know about everybody to agree with that, but it's just a fact of the demographics changes. And with that said, are all these older people going to just retire and hang out and wait for the Grim Reaper? Or do they have some purpose? Do they feel they still have meaning? And if they do, what will they do with it? So we suggested there was a population that was in great need, and that was the young teens who were, during COVID, isolated, depressed, unfriended on social media, not being able to converse with their friends live. And we said, why don't we have older adults mentor teens? And then we said, because we know that people gain so much more if they give and don't just receive. So we said, why don't we have these teens now pay it forward and give to younger children and create this 3-generation model of sharing and giving? And that's where the origin came from. It was both personal and both thinking educationally. And so we started that project. And I guess to me, the power of it has been proven because it's just spreading. It's in the United Neighborhood Settlement House movement in New York. It's in Los Angeles with the mayor's office. It's now in Colorado. It's now at Montclair State. There's a university model. There's a community center model. There's a senior care center model because it's being used. And I guess personally for me, I'll give you just 2 examples of what I thought were really powerful. One was one of my first meetings at Henry Street Settlement House. We were doing a training. A part of the training is to show a segment with Maya Angelou, who sings the song about, "My name's Maya, it's a fine name, and it's not your name, but it's fine just the same." So we use that as a way to talk about our name. So I had this young African-American young man whose name was James. And I said, "All right, James, we're going to share. You tell me about your name. Are you named after anybody? Does it have a meaning? And I'll tell you about my name." So he goes and he said, "My name is James. My mother thought of giving me an African-American name, but she said, you might want to be a lawyer, and I'm not going to give you that name because I'm going to let you make your own decisions about your name when you get older, but I'm calling you James." He said, "Now your turn." I go, "I'm not so happy about Lewis. I was named after a grandfather, but I like my Hebrew name. My Hebrew name is Aryeh Lev Yehuda, which means in English, Judah the Lionhearted. And I loved Richard the Lionhearted, and there's stories of Richard the Lionhearted. And I'm saying I really like that name." And so we started to converse. And all of a sudden, the barriers of his upbringing, his living on the Lower East Side as an African-American kid, me as an older Jewish American coming from the Bronx, all of a sudden, all that disappeared. And we were relating to each other. And I said, "Hey, James, I'm not going to be here next week as I really like to be, but I'm having a knee replacement, so I won't be here next week." He said, "Okay, who's going to be here?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "But," I said, "you can always call me if you want to." He said, "Okay, let me have your number." I'm in the recovery room, fast forward a week, after my knee replacement. First phone call I get, "James, why are you calling me?" He goes, I want to know how you're doing. How was the operation? So it was just one trial. I mean, these programs usually last 8 weeks. And I just sensed I connected to him. He connected to me. I want James to succeed in any way he can. He wanted me to be well. Uh, how does that happen? It happens because you share your vulnerabilities and you share who you are with each other. And the humanity of a project like this just really transcends any of those differences. So, a longer answer than you probably wanted, but there you go.
No, just as long as I need it. Do you feel that that can happen naturally? Like, if you're meeting someone, like, how can someone open themselves up to share in a way that that connection can be formed outside of a setting where you're explicitly trying to build these relationships?
It can, but one of the strengths is its artificiality. Is that we're having this meeting and we're using Sesame Street segments that were made ostensibly for a preschooler, but was always made multi-generationally because we wanted older adults to be able to watch with young children because we knew they would gain so much more if the older adult would be there, would support it, would extend it. So here we are watching a segment that they may have remembered from their childhood or may not, but all of a sudden it's like it's safe territory. And I'm a safe person. James may never see me again. I may never see James. So I can share, he can share with me. There's no grade for this. It's just like being an honest sharing. And I think that structure really helps it. It's not as if it couldn't happen elsewhere. It's just that this kind of facilitates that. And especially if you're going week after week, especially with a preschooler who needs 3 sessions maybe to unwind and feel comfortable to talk to you, that really helps them. So, one of the my first mentees was a young man named Henry, and Henry had a little girl named Charlize, from, uh, Children's Aid Society, from, I guess around 125th Street, one of the places there. And Charlize, the first session hardly spoke to him. The second session hardly spoke to him. And I said, Henry, why don't you try using the curriculum a little bit more? Why don't you use the toolkits? And he said to me, I just want to befriend her. So I'm going to just do this on my own. I said, fine. The third session, Charlize comes in and says, Henry, you're my best friend, aren't you? And it blew him away, and all of a sudden, boom, there was magic. There was magic. He gave her time. He gave her time to feel comfortable, and I think that was part of the strength of it. So
Wow. So I guess this touches time and it touches relationships. You mentioned that you asked your wife 3 times to marry you. Could you speak to what gave you the confidence to keep asking? And what that experience was like when you didn't get the yes immediately and how you moved forward?
okay, before I tell it all, I'll tell you one other 3-generation mentoring story. So one of the segments we have is a segment about Cookie Monster being a contestant on Guy Smiley's game show, and he's told by Guy Smiley, "Cookie, you're a contestant," and he said, "What the price?" And he said, "It's a cookie." He said, "Okay, we play." He said, "But if you don't eat the cookie, I'll give you 2 cookies. If you can wait." It's the old marshmallow study. Can you wait? Can you delay? So it's a great segment. So I'm looking at this segment with Vivian from Austin, Texas, who just graduated the University of Texas. I said, Vivian, do you have anything that's anything like the feeling about delaying gratification? She says, no, you go first. So I tell her the story about asking my wife to marry, my wife now, to marry me. And she says, no. I asked her a second time. She says, no. I asked her a third time. She said, no. I said, Vivian, did you ever see Waiting for Godot? I had to make a decision. Was I waiting for Godot? Would this never happen? Do I ask a fourth time? I said, part of my personality, now here's my answer to you. Part of my personality is that I am, maybe one of my best attributes is I'm stubborn. I'm stubborn. And I knew that this was a relationship that was the right relationship because we were very much in love in Israel. And I came back from Israel, and she was in medical school already, and I was just starting my PhD, and I knew all the ambiance had changed. The sparks hadn't left, but they had been muted by the environment. So I said, "You have to give it time." And I told myself, "One more. We'll give it one more time, the fourth time." Why did she say yes? You'll have to interview her, Gilad, and ask.
That's the deal.
But, there I know you wanna know more about relationships, so look, when you first meet somebody, it's such a strange thing how your brain and your heart operate together. Your brain says, "I have a concept of who I might wanna live my life with." Your heart has, a subconscious, subtle awareness of what that all means, and that somehow they have to work together to deal with things. And I would say the heart usually has to overcome the brain in thinking about things. And part of the heart is, for me, is the soul. Is there a soul connection to that person? And part of the brain is, do you want to spend time with this person? Do you get bored talking to them? Because you're going to spend a lot of time if you really want to commit to another person. Um, that's part of the way I think I thought about it. I knew I liked spending time. I knew she liked spending time with me. I knew there was a spark. I knew there was a soulful connection about how we wanted to live our lives. So I kept at it.
Wow. Beautiful. Sometime Godot does come. So I'm glad you waited. If you're thinking about kind of the different seasons that you've had, because you're even speaking from Israel to coming back to the States, things changed, but in life there are different seasons. How do you approach those when things fundamentally change in big ways? I don't know if there are any examples that come to mind, but how do you keep all of those beautiful things when the seasons change?
Well, life is about change. There's nothing more constant than change. My late father-in-law used to say, and I think part of it is to know that there are constants in your own personality and maybe constants in your vision about life, but you often need to understand that nothing is given to you, to quote an Israeli poet, on a silver platter. You yourself have to understand that there are things you have to work for. And my grandson was just bar mitzvahed, and I had the privilege of teaching him, one of my grandsons, of teaching him how to read the Torah. And I remember in a little speech I had to give, for a minute, I said, "Welcome, Jonah, to you now have a free entrance to, like an American Express card. You're getting your first Jewish Express card to the roller coaster of Jewish life." I said, "It's going to have its ups and it's going to have its downs. That's pretty much the history of the Jewish experience." I said, "And you have to learn to ride. Don't get off. It's going to be bumpy. You're going to scream at the top, and sometimes you're going to hit the bottom." I said, "But that's part of life. And how do you prepare for it? In some way, studying history, understanding that, what might look really bad today could certainly change tomorrow. Things can flip in a minute, and don't be too cocky when things are at the top." My wife is the one who often reminds me of both of those things. So having a good spouse is very helpful to dealing with the challenges of life. And illness is a part of life, and having to deal with illness of people you love. You could say, "Why me?" It's about life. It's not about you, and it's about how do you respond. Most of the time, we can't control what happens to us, but we have a little bit of control how we react to what happens to us. And I think that's part of what gives us some strength to face the changing seasons of our lives.
I think a piece that touches here also is gratefulness. And I'd be curious if that's a trait that you feel came naturally to you or one that you had to cultivate.
I I think I was given a good dose of that by the Lord above. So I think my personality is appreciative in general, but it doesn't mean you just take it and leave it there. I think you have to really work on all aspects of your personality. I I think I am more grateful, uh, it's easier for me than it is for me to control anger. When I get angry, I'm slow to get there, but when I get angry, it's really hard for me to calm down. And I think part of the thing you have to realize is that it's not a good attribute to be angry. You lose judgment, uh, you lose control, so you have to work on it. So even driving, I learned my basic driving when I was a I think a student in Israel, and Israeli drivers are maybe just one grade above Egyptian drivers. And Egyptian drivers basically say, you need three things to drive in Egypt. You need good brakes, a good horn, and good luck. And so he's tending to drive like that even in New York. So one of the things you need to do is also take your own driving course to say, hey, I'll let somebody cut me off. Not a big deal. Although it really hurt me for a long time. I wanted to educate those drivers. At some point, you have to learn how to control things. In terms of gratefulness, I think that was more natural to me than it was for me to get over things like anger.
This constant striving to grow, where has that come from? And how do you pass that on as well? Because life, obviously, as you said, is about change, but not everyone is able to look internally and say, oh, maybe I don't need to get as angry. How do you think we can teach that? How do you think we can foster that mindset where we say, no, 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 the beauty of life is you can be better tomorrow?
That's such a good question. I'm not really sure of that. I think there's a duality in both wanting to grow more and to push oneself in contrast to being content and accepting times when you can't, when you just have to be somehow satisfied with what your abilities are and where you've gotten to. And I think part of that comes from a sense of respect that I remember my wife's grandfather saying, I never met him. He was a brilliant man. He used to say in Yiddish, "Sei a street cleaner, but sei a Mensch." He said, "You could be a street cleaner, but you have to be a Mensch. It doesn't matter what your job is. It matters how you respond to the world, how you interact with the world." And I think growth shouldn't be just thought of in terms of your accomplishments, in terms of the amount of money you make or the amount of money you donate to good causes. It has to be, how do you treat people? How do you respond to others? Uh, as well as somehow giving to a profession that you care to work in, whether that profession is being a good carpenter, whether it's a profession of being a good lawyer. It's a question of being a mensch to all of that, because you could have the greatest of professions and not be, and you could have the least of professions in theory and still be. So I think growth is both, a mindset, uh, something that comes out of your experience as a child and seeing what other people do. My synagogue community used to announce people's accomplishments, who made the best lists in schools, what colleges did you get into, all of that kind of stuff. But more important than that was that they would correct you publicly if you made a mistake in reading the Torah. And they'd say, no, there's a correct way to do it, and there's an incorrect way. I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm trying to let you know there's a standard here. So somehow standards are not necessarily bad for people to have. I've had three dogs, and one of the best books I ever read was the monks of I think it's St. Keat or Mount St. Keat in upstate New York. They trained German shepherds at a monastery. And if you read the book, it's a great book for training dogs. But this is going to sound terrible, but it's not a bad book for child rearing, because what it does is it says you can have love, but you can have discipline. And trying to put those two things together, I think, often provides people with a sense of the ability to grow and the ability to fail and the ability to know that there's still love there from a parent, but also that there's the ability for you to internalize your own sense of self as you strive. Oh, I don't know if that's a good answer, but best I
No, it sounds like balance is a key in life of, seeing our beauty, seeing our place for improvement, love, discipline. But always the final question is the name of the possible podcast is the possible. And I would love to hear a story from your life that you think captures your sense of what is possible in this earth.
So, it's interesting. I'll give you a contrast. My wife, as a physician, saw patient after patient, and her frame of reference was to heal one individual at a time. And she said, "You went to media and reached hundreds of millions of children on Sesame Street. Your frame of reference was like you thought you were part of being a prophet, trying to reach people and educate." And I said, somewhere the truth is both. You can dream big and act small. You can act individually, but you need to think about the world and its place and the ability to affect it. Sometimes we are lucky. We can achieve a little of that. Sometimes it may not last. I don't know if the Israeli-Palestinian Sesame Street project that I had worked on had any deep roots that lasted over the hatred and the violence that we've seen, unfortunately, too much of. But it doesn't mean that I have the right not to try. That is an imperative for me. And I think that's an imperative for all human beings is to try to make things better in our own individual small way. And if we think in grandiose terms, and whatever grandiose terms we could think of. So that's kind of my sense of the impossible possible.
Amazing. May we always strive. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Gilad. My pleasure.